Alright, what's up guys, it's KOSDFF here, and today I'm going to tell you guys the story of when I moved to law school, when I conquered one of my greatest fears, which was moving out to the middle of the country where I was totally alone. I actually moved out to Oklahoma, a place where I don't know a soul save a couple family friends that lived like 2 hours away in Tulsa. And it was probably one of the scariest things I've ever done in my life. Now, towards the end of college, I started to see the light at the end of the tunnel, and it was really between go do more school or go find a job. And I'm not gonna lie, towards the end of college, I wasn't really in the working mode. I really loved school, and I kind of wanted to continue it. Plus, I graduated right in the middle of a recession, and there really wasn't a whole lot of jobs out there, and I was really scared about not finding one. And well, what better way to guarantee I would get a job was to go get more school. And it was even the reason I majored in accounting in college. As I was going through school, like most college students, I had no idea what I wanted to major in. I had no idea what I wanted to do with my life. I did know I wanted to be in business, so I was in the business school there. So when it came down to the deadline where we had to pick a major, I simply picked accounting because it was the class I'd always done the best in. And my parents always told me everybody needs an accountant, so if I got my accounting degree and eventually went and got my CPA license, that I would always have a job. And I was like, yes, that's really all I was worried about. So when graduation was creeping up and everyone was going on interviews and going out and getting jobs and all this different shit, I decided I'd rather continue my education, whether it was getting a master's or going to get a law degree or going to do something. I just really didn't want to go out into the workforce yet. Now, a lot of these decisions had to do with money. I don't come from an extremely wealthy family, and as everyone knows, law school is expensive as fuck, and so is college. Now, my grandparents and my parents all really chipped in and really helped me through school, but when it came time to pick a graduate school, I had to go find a loan or a scholarship or a grant or something to help me pay for it, because there was just no way I could go unless I found the money. And that is the answer to the question of why did I go out to Oklahoma, a state in the middle of nowhere where I knew absolutely no one, and a small private law school out there offered me a full ride, so that was instantly the school I was going to go to. Plus, Oklahoma has a relatively low cost of living, and all the other places I got into were in these big major cities where I would have spent an arm and a leg renting some tiny ass apartment, and I really didn't know anybody in any of these cities, so when it came down to choosing a law school, it was really just based on dollars. Now, I'm assuming most of you guys saw my video when my best friend sued me. This actually kept me in North Carolina the whole summer when I was supposed to move out to Oklahoma and get kind of situated. So right off the back, this story kind of sucks because I was really planning on having like a whole 3 months to go out there and make friends, find an apartment, get situated, buy all my books, maybe read up a little bit on my subjects, because you guys all know law school is hard as fuck. Everything they say about that place is true. But nope, the hand fate dealt me that summer was that I was to stay in North Carolina and wait for that damn lawsuit, which eventually ended up being bullshit. So now I'm in a complete rush to move out to the middle of the country, get set up, and then go to law school. Now, of course, this is like a 17-hour drive all the way from North Carolina. You're pretty much driving halfway across the country. So my parents and I loaded up a U-Haul and my Explorer and did the drive all the way out into the middle of nowhere. And the only thing I really remember about that drive is everything went from green to just flat and dead. Over this like 17-hour trip on one road, you can actually drive from North Carolina to Oklahoma like 99% all on one fucking road. You never turn, you never do anything. The ride was absolutely terrible because there's nothing like worse than driving to somewhere you're kind of worried or nervous about. And at this point, I'm not gonna lie, I was extremely nervous. One of my like biggest fears is just being totally alone, like utterly and totally alone. I am very much a social creature and I very much attached to the people around me. And I was moving out to a place where I literally didn't know a soul. The only people I did know were some family friends that I hadn't seen in an extremely long time that lived like an hour and a half away. So for the most part, I was totally and completely alone. But I still needed a place to live, so right before I left, I looked up on Craigslist, a place where all college students go to find places to live, and I found a house owned by this medical student, and her 2 roommates and 2 other guys all lived in this big ass like frat house style situation. It was her, another girl named Courtney, and another girl named Sarah, I really can't remember, a guy named Chris, and a guy named Joseph. So I thought this would be a great situation for me because there was like 5 people in the house and they were all in graduate school or had recently graduated and were working. So I was like, here we go. I'm going to move in there. You know, 5 people, one of them's going to be my friend and I won't be completely alone. After the 17-hour drive, we finally arrived in Oklahoma and we pulled up to the house and all the roommates were there and they were all pre-gaming and drinking because they were about to go out and have a night, which was kind of lame because they were all like socializing and I was just kind of like there, totally feeling like I was just infringing on their night. But no, we pulled up there and me and my dad slowly moved everything up into my room and I brought a whole lot of shit. If you guys have seen any of my vlogs, you can kind of see my command center. I like to keep everything kind of, just, I don't know, cluttered. So we unpacked everything and then my parents took me to a place where all parents take their young students. Fucking Walmart, and all we bought was cold cuts and a whole bunch of random stuff like towels and other toiletries that I needed. My dad bought me some beer. And before you guys instantly think he bought it for me illegally, I'm going to law school, so obviously I'm over 21. And after we got back from Walmart, they pretty much left me. They went to a hotel they had got just down the street because obviously they weren't going to turn around and drive another 17 hours home, but they were leaving the next morning. So I spent the night on Skype with an old friend and kind of setting up my room and stuff like that. I couldn't really get a whole lot done because I didn't want to be loud. And at this point it was like 2 o'clock in the morning, but I did manage to get my desk set up and my bed set up, and all the roommates had eventually worked their way up to my room to say hi to me. They even invited me to go out with them that night, but I was like absolutely exhausted. I had just driven 17 hours. All I wanted was a shower and a bed. And these people were extremely social, as I was about to find out. They all went out drinking like 2 or 3 nights a week. They all did these big group dinners and they went out all the time. They were just total fucking outgoing people, which was 100% not me back then. Back then, I was just this weird, awkward, like totally lost kid who was really just a homebody and liked to find a small group of friends and just hang out there, which is what I had in college. We didn't really go out to bars a whole lot. When we did, it was a lot of fun, but we just didn't go all the time and never really went out like constantly to go do social things, unless they were parties at each other's apartments or at another person's apartment. And really not because we were nerds or anything like that. It just had to do with money. You know, it's expensive to go out to bars. It's expensive to go out to restaurants and all that shit. So when I moved there, they really pushed me to go out and hang out with them all the time, which I did in the very beginning, because I did have like 2 or 3 weeks until law school started, and I really didn't have much to do besides set up my room and read some of these terrifying books that people had written about their 1L year to prepare me. And although I was extremely exhausted, I really only slept for like 3 or 4 hours. I was really nervous and in a weird place with a whole bunch of strangers. Extremely not cool. But my parents got up in a few hours and drove to the house to say goodbye to me. I gave my dad a hug and my mom a hug, and she was freaking out because she was leaving her baby in this totally foreign place. And I still remember the feeling when they drove off and I walked up to my room and I was like, damn, I am completely and utterly alone out in the middle of fucking nowhere. But it didn't even end up being that bad. My bet that I can make friends with one of these 5 people, or all 5 of them, ended up working. We went out a bunch. Now I didn't instantly like just buddy up with any of them because they were so different and they were already such a clique, and I was just kind of like third wheeling it for a while. I eventually ended up becoming friends with a guy named Chris that lived in the house. He played guitar as well, so we got together and like, you know, jammed a whole bunch. But worrying about all this shit was short-lived anyways, because in 2 weeks, law school started. So that whole time I was worrying about being alone and making friends and like worrying about my social life all disappeared. Law school became my life. Now, if you guys haven't heard the horror stories about people's 1L years, which is their first year of law school, there's books that have been written about it. It is a terrifying experience. And what do I mean by it being terrifying? Oh, it's not just because you're going to law school and it's kind of intimidating. No, it's how law school is taught. And in the first year, they really stick it to you in this like survival of the fittest scenario. But if you didn't know, law school is taught using the Socratic method of teaching. If you've never heard of that, it's a little different from your normal American high school like educational situation. Instead of the teacher standing up in front of the classroom and giving a lecture, they actually systematically go through the crowd of students and have them come up to the front of the classroom or stand up in their seat and answer a barrage of questions. So the teacher actually does very little lecturing. All they really do is assign reading and lead discussion. And that was what my life was like for the next 3 years. Literally every single day you go into school just with the absolute fear of being called on, because these teachers stand you up in front of everybody, and these classrooms had like 80, 90 people in there, and it's law school, so everyone's dressed up and super serious and you want to impress everybody. Smart really is the only version of cool in that place. And they stand you up and they just hit you with questions, and the better you do, the harder the questions get. Their total goal is to break you. I think in that entire 3 years, there was only like 1 or 2 instances where the student knew everything. And they really only got away with that because the teacher had to move on and start asking somebody else. Now, the worst teachers would call on you and you'd be up for the entire class. And these are like hour-and-a-half classes. Imagine walking in there just praying you don't get called on, and there's no system for it. They just randomly pick you. And they would just call on you, and you would know for the next hour-and-a-half you're gonna be just fucking pelted with questions about last night's reading. Nicer teachers, and especially nicer teachers in harder classes, would end up calling on multiple people just simply because, you know, obviously if one person didn't read, you would just be fucked and the whole class would just suck. Meaner teachers would just sit there and pick on you mentally. And right now, I bet a lot of you that are like really good at high school are saying, well, if you did the reading, that's probably not a big deal. Well, it is law school, and they assign you an ungodly amount of reading. I'm talking every single night you would have to read for 5 or 6 hours minimum. And that's just a one over everything. So you didn't have time to study every single night. You would spend 4, 5, 6 hours reading, and then maybe like an hour or 2 briefing the most important cases, because worst case scenarios, you go in there and know nothing. So you would just kind of read everything so that you would have a basic idea, and then you would brief the harder cases that maybe you thought you were going to get called on. But it was just basically survival. And the worst part is if they called on you and you actually got like a bunch of the answers right, that really just increased your chances of them calling on you again, because if the teacher would go around a class and couldn't find anybody that knew the answer, they'd go right right to you. So it was either fuck up in front of all your classmates and be embarrassed, or do really well and just get called on more. Now you would think I'm making this sound a little bit worse than it is, but no, I'm actually making it sound a lot nicer than it was. It was fucking terrifying and terrible all the time. Kids fainted in front of the whole class numerous times. Girls broke out in tears. Now really that was just the hazing stage of law school, because although this was extremely terrifying most of the time, you did get used to it. And eventually when you got called on, it was like a wave of relief, because then you knew you didn't have to get called on for like another week or two. And maybe you could ease up on some of the reading because you've been spending literally every spare second of your life buried in a textbook. But no, after a while I eventually set into a groove and made some friends in law school, because they would put you in group projects all the time for all these moot courtroom ordeals and things like that. And it was where I met my future roommate Brandon, who actually introduced me to Call of Duty. So I guess in the end everything ended up fine. I ended up flourishing in law school. I made a lot of great friends there. I did really well in school. And although I fucking hated Oklahoma, I had no time to hate it. Literally every single second of my life was spent buried in a textbook or in class. I practically lived in the library. I had no social life. Eventually towards the end of law school, I ended up with like an hour of free time every day, and I ended up spending that time making YouTube videos. But I will leave you guys with this little mini speech. I will say moving out to a place where I knew absolutely no one was extremely terrifying. Of all the experiences in my life, I believe it was one of the most impactful, as it taught me a lot about myself. It taught me a lot about being alone and being okay. It taught me a lot about striving for your goals no matter what it costs. And in turn, it afforded me an extreme amount of confidence to be able to conquer something like that. Be able to say, yes, I can go out into the unknown and be okay. That I don't need a shoulder to cry on, that I don't need friends, that I don't need family, that I can actually go out there and not like totally crumble. I feel like this is something that an American soldier or someone that went away to boot camp can kind of relate to, or anybody who really went to college that didn't know anybody. But college is a little different. That's an extremely social atmosphere where everybody wants to make friends, whereas I'm sure the military and like law school, it's a lot about like being in the military and a lot about like school. But it really does teach you the value of friendship and the value of company. And although those were some of the loneliest times I've ever had in my entire life, I would never have taken them back. I would have never have changed them. So if any of you guys have the opportunity to go somewhere completely alone, to go experience something like wholly by yourself, don't do it. Take someone. It's a lot more fun with somebody. But if you have no choice, don't worry. You will be okay. You will find friends. You will flourish. You will do everything you wanted to do. Just be brave. Please leave a like if you enjoyed another one of my stupid little stories, and I'll see you tomorrow.